Okay, so this is the Torah portion. When you read that, you think it says Acharei mot. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? In Hebrew, I'm not going to go too much into this, but when you see a CH in Hebrew, don't pronounce it as a K sound. It's not a K sound. It's more accurate to pronounce it as a H sound, because it's actually a chet. It's not a ket. It's a chet. It's like a H with a bit of a ch. It's the letter that usually makes me do that. So it's Acharei mot. Okay, there's no short O in Hebrew either. It's always a long O. It's mot. So Acharei mot is what it says. I'll keep it brief because the first part of this is quite in depth. I feel like this week just a huge piece of the scriptures has kind of just fallen into place, and a load of things have made sense in a way that they've not made sense in before, and I want to be able to explain that. So the first part's going to be fairly long. Second part probably about normal length. Third part pretty short. In the first part, what I want to look at is atonement, because it's the underlying theme of pretty much all of the scriptures. And I don't know, would it be fair to say, anyone put their hand up, can say that they understand what atonement is and what Yeshua did when he atoned for us? Well, that's what I want to go into. And in order to understand what atonement is, it's difficult to know which to explain first, whether to explain what atonement is or why atonement is necessary. We'll kind of come to the conclusion that if you can understand why atonement is necessary, then you can understand what it is. So, why was atonement necessary? This is the word Mishkan, okay? And it means dwelling place or tabernacle. Actually, more accurately, it means dwelling place, because it's actually from a root which means to dwell. And it's a place where Yehovah actually comes to live, basically, where he comes to abide. And he's got one on earth, and he's got one on heaven. And he actually comes into those places, and he lives there. This is what the Strong's definition says. A residence, including a shepherd's hut, the lair of animals, figuratively the grave, also the temple, specifically the tabernacle, properly its wooden walls, dwelling place, habitation, tabernacle, tent. And it's not just something that's used of Yehovah. Yehovah is not the only one who's got a Mishkan. We can have Mishkans as well. They're just places that we live. So this is a place that Yehovah comes physically into reality to live. So it's an important place. Okay, it's from this verb root, which is shakan. And shakan is a verb, it's something you do. It means to settle down, to abide, to dwell, to tabernacle, or to reside. That's why it's called the tabernacle, because it's where Yehovah tabernacles. It's a place on earth that he chooses to come into and make his own. And as such, as a holy Elohim, the tabernacle has to be prepared in a very special way in order for him to be able to dwell there. Numbers 24:5 shows us Mishkan being used for a human dwelling. How good are your tents, O Yaakov, your Mishkanik, just the plural of Mishkan, O Yisrael. 1 Chronicles 6:48 says, and their brothers, the Levites, were appointed to every kind of service of the Mishkan, of the place where Yehovah dwells, the house of Elohim. So explain something quickly that will be useful as we go on. House of Elohim, the house of Elohim is Bayit, which means house. Ha Elohim. Ha means the, Elohim means God, obviously. So you've got literally house, the God. We've looked at when two nouns are next to each other, the of is implied. But the goes in the middle. Think of Ruach HaKodesh. Okay, that means literally spirit, the holiness. Kodesh being the noun, holy, holiness. So this is how Hebrew works with these things, and we're going to see that a couple of times, so I thought I'd explain it now. 1 Chronicles 17:4-5 says, "Go and you shall say to my servant David, thus said Yehovah, you do not build me a house to dwell in, for I've not dwelt in a house since the time that I brought up Yisrael, even to this day, but have gone from the tent to the tent and Mishkan." Okay, so this is where he has chosen to dwell. And this is why atonement is so important. Atonement actually allows Yehovah to dwell on the earth in the midst of our filthiness, basically, in the midst of the fallen world where you've got this cycle of life and death going on. For him, Holy Elohim, to come in, it has to be prepared in a certain way. And that is what making atonement is. Actually, kafaring. I'm going to use the word kafar because we don't have a concept in English. But if we can understand what the Hebrew concept of kafaring is, then you'll understand what I mean. Numbers 35:33-34 says, "And do not pollute the land where you are, for blood pollutes the land, and the land is not kafared for the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it." So in order to atone for the blood that is shed on it, it has to be done. It has to be the blood of the one who shed it. And that blood actually atones, makes atonement. And it's because the land's become polluted, and this is going to be really important for us to understand. Atonement is actually to do with making something clean. Okay, the word as we'll look at is to do with kind of covering over something, but it's covering it with something in particular. It's kind of like covering it with cleanness. Do not defile the land. Do not make the land tamei, unclean, in which you inhabit, in the midst of which I shekan. For I, Yehovah, am shekaning in the midst of the children of Israel. So you don't defile the land because he's physically dwelling there. An atonement needs to be made if he's there to allow him to dwell there. Otherwise his presence will leave. So what is atonement in the scriptures? Now we can kind of understand it now that we know what it's for. Okay, this is the verb. It's kafar. Outline of biblical usage says to cover, purge, make an atonement. Not really very useful. Make reconciliation, kind of. Atonement in some cases will make reconciliation with us and Yehovah. Cover over with pitch, which is because of one particular usage that we'll get to. The definition says a primitive root to cover, specifically with bitumen, which again is the one we'll look at. Figuratively, to expiate or condone, to placate or cancel. And you find when you're looking into these things, you get a lot of words like, he is our expiation. And when you're trying to trace atonement from the Old Testament into the New Testament, it actually becomes very difficult. And I'll try to show you the way that you do that. Genesis 6:14 says, "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and kafar it inside and outside with tar." So we've got this in its literal meaning here. It's real world sort of meaning of to cover something. In its ritual meaning almost, its meaning theologically to Yehovah, it kind of means cover, but it's got this extra dimension, which is to make it clean. So here's a word, kofar, which is also used in that verse. It's the noun form of to cover over. So it's kind of like a covering, we might call it. But it's used as ransom or bribe. When a ransom is paid, or the price of a life, that's the word that's used. It also says asphalt pitches a covering. Because it's used here, it says kafara inside and outside with kofar, with this covering. And this is kind of a picture of what we're going to see today on the Day of Atonement, of making atonement for the ark with this covering. Exodus 29:35-37, this is what we looked at when this was leading to the 8th day. The 7 days when the priests were all prepared to be able to go into the tabernacle and serve. "And so you shall do to Aharon and his sons according to all that I have commanded you. 7 days you shall ordain them. Prepare a bull each day, a chata'at for Kippur." Kippur, the noun, which is the name for the concept, atonement. You can make atonement, that's a verb. The noun for it is atonement, and it's kippur. It's actually a word that only appears in the plural in the Hebrew, so it's actually kippurim. And you shall cleanse the altar when you kafar for it. So this is what it's about. It's about making the altar clean, because remember, Yehovah was going to appear there. You shall anoint it to set it apart. For 7 days you shall kafar for the altar and set it apart, and the altar shall be holy of holies. Whatever touches the altar is to be set apart. So we've got these two things. When you've made atonement for something, it's been made clean. And then from that point, you can make it holy. It's holy and it's set apart then. It's not just in the world and clean, it's set apart. Ezekiel 43, 24 to 27, we see something happening very similar to this event that we saw leading up to the 8th day, but this is in the context of the millennial kingdom. This is when there has been, this is the time of reformation, the reforming of the Levitical system, where we see things done very slightly differently. It says, and you shall bring them before Yehovah, and the priest shall throw salt on them and offer them up as an olah to Yehovah. Prepare a goat for achata'at daily for 7 days, not a bull this time, a goat. Prepare a young bull and a ram from the flock, perfect ones. For 7 days they shall kafar for the altar and cleanse it and ordain it. You're always going to see this when atonement is made for something. It's to do with cleansing it. And when these days are completed, it shall be on the 8th day, Shmini. Thereafter the priests make your olot and your shlamim on the altar, and I shall accept you, declares the Master Yehovah. Exodus 30, 7 to 16, it says, Aharon shall katar on it sweet incense morning by morning. This is the golden altar of incense. There was the altar outside the tabernacle where the animal sacrifices were done. Then once you go into the holy place, there's the golden altar, and that is before the veil, which is round the Holy of Holies, the most holy place. As he tends the lamps, he shall katar incense on it, offer up the incense. And when Aharon lights the lamps between the evenings, he shall katar incense on it, a continual incense before Yehovah throughout your generations. Do not offer strange incense on it, or an olah, or a mincha, and do not pour a drink offering on it. So it's not for burnt offerings or ishas. And Aharon shall kafar upon its horns once a year with the blood of the sin offering, the chata'at of atonement. And this is what we're going to see on the Day of Atonement. Once he's come out of making atonement for the Holy of Holies, he will do this on the altar. Once a year he kafars upon it throughout your generations. It is kadashim to Yehovah. Yehovah spoke to Moshe saying, when you take the census of the children of Israel to register them, then each one shall give an atonement for his life. Actually, a ransom for his soul is literally what it says, this covering. So what we can see is that making atonement for something, it's not just something that priests will do. It's something that can be done, in fact, by us. We can have this covering for our soul to Yehovah. When you register them, so there is no plague among them when you register them. Everyone among those who are registered is to give this. Half a shekel according to the shekel of the set apart place. 20 geras being a shekel. The half shekel is the terumah to Yehovah. Everyone passing over to be registered from 20 years old and above gives a terumah to Yehovah. Okay, and this is the census, isn't it? To be registered is to be numbered. This is where David was tempted by Hasatan to take a census without this having been done. So there was no covering. They were not clean before Yehovah in order to be counted as part of Israel. They were not acceptable before him, and he counted them anyway. The rich does not give more, and the poor does not give less than half a shekel when you give it to terumah to Yehovah, to kafar for your souls, atone for your souls. And you shall take the silver for the kippur from the children of Israel and give it for the service of the tent of meeting, and it shall be to the children of Israel for a remembrance in the presence of Yehovah to kafar for your souls. When we come to this is the verse that Charlie mentioned last week that I'd be covering. When the days of her cleansing are complete, For a son or a daughter, she brings to the priest the lamb a year old as an olah, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a cheta'at to the door of the tent of meetings. This is the woman who's had the child. After the days of her cleansing are complete, then she brings something. He shall bring it before Yehovah and kafar for her, and she shall be cleansed from the flow of her blood. So these offerings are for her cleansing. They're not for specific sins that the person might have done that they then need to make up for, which is kind of what we think of when we think of making atonement. It's actually for her cleansing, and it's all to do with this realm in which we dwell, which is unclean, and there's life and there's death in there, and the creation has been corrupted, subject to futility, as Paul says in Romans. And because of this, these offerings are necessary in order to make you clean and acceptable before Yehovah. Sin is what corrupts the world, isn't it? Okay, sin was the reason that death has entered into the creation. So a sin offering is offered and it cleanses her. Leviticus 14, 48 to 53 says, however, if the priest indeed comes in and looks at it and sees that the plague is not spread in the house after the house was plastered, then the priest shall pronounce the house clean because the plague is healed. And to cleanse the house, he shall take 2 birds and cedar wood and scarlet hyssop, and he shall kill one of the birds in an earthen vessel over running water. He shall take the cedar wood and the hyssop and the scarlet, the live bird, dip them in the blood of the slain bird in the running water, and shall sprinkle the house 7 times. He shall thus cleanse the house with the blood of the bird. He's making an atonement for the house. He is cleansing it. The house obviously hasn't committed any sin, but he needs the blood to cleanse the house. And he shall let the live bird loose outside the city in the open field, and kafar for the house. He's got to make atonement for the house. Again, the house hasn't done anything wrong, but he needs to cleanse the house, and it shall be clean. Okay, all the way through the laws of clean and unclean, you've got these atonements being made. Some things, it just says wash your body and then you'll be unclean until evening. But certain things, in fact most things, almost everything, as it says in Hebrew, according to the Torah, is cleansed with blood. Okay, so kippur, the noun. Masculine noun means atonement. Again, unless you know what atonement is, this is worth virtually nothing to you. Here we've got it talking about something we're going to see today. On the 10th day of the 7th Chodesh is the Day of Atonement. Okay, again, the Day of Atonement is like the Spirit of Holiness. Yom HaKippurim says day, the atonements, basically. Okay, but it's rendered in English as the Day of Atonement. It shall be a set-apart gathering for you. You shall afflict your souls and shall draw near with an Isha to Yehovah. We've got this word which we need to understand as well. Kaporet. Okay, and the kaporet is the mercy seat, or perhaps more accurately, the place of atonement. And this is the most holy place that has ever existed on the earth. And that's because Yehovah actually appears above the mercy seat. So it's actually called the place of atonement. It's where atonement needs to be made on that one day of the year, even though Yehovah is in the Holy of Holies, really quite far separated from the uncleanness of the world. Just in order for him to dwell there all of the time, atonement has to be made once a year, and the high priest has to come in and put the blood on and atone for it and cleanse it so that he can stay there. Exodus 25 verse 17 says, you shall make a place of atonement, a kaporet of clean gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. This understanding of what making atonement is interesting for us to understand what was happening when Yehovah would wipe people out with plagues. Okay, when they were in the wilderness, when something went wrong, he wiped them out with plagues, didn't he? Psalm 78, 25 to 38 talks about when they had the quail, when they were complaining about the manna and they got the quail. Men ate bread of angels. He sent them provisions to satisfaction. He made an east wind blow in the heavens, and by his power he brought the south wind. He rained meat on them like the dust, and winged birds like the sand of the seas, and let them fall in the midst of his camp, all around his Mishkan. Again, so it's this particular word that is used all around the place where he dwells. So they ate and were completely satisfied, for he brought them what they desired. They had not turned away their desire. Their food was still in their mouths when the wrath of Elohim came against them. He slew among their fat ones, and he struck down the choice ones of Israel, which is language that we would expect of kind of sacrifices, isn't it? The best, the choice ones, the fatlings of Bashan, the best that would be offered to Yehovah. Interesting language. It says, in spite of all this, they still sinned and did not believe his wonders. So he ended their days in a breath and their years in trouble. When he slew them, they sought him. And they returned and did earnestly seek Ale. And this was the reaction that so many people have. Something's going wrong, better turn back to Yehovah and, seek his face. However, when they remembered that Elohim was the rock and the Most High Ale, their Redeemer, but they flattered him with their mouth, they lied to him with their tongue, because that's not really where their heart's right. It was just because something had gone wrong, they turned back to him. For their heart was not steadfast with him, and they were not true to his covenant. But he, the compassionate one, atoned for, or kafared, iniquity. He did not destroy them, and many times he turned his displeasure away, did not stir up all his wrath. So he's killing them, and this is making atonement for the sin of the other people in the camp. So, understanding now what making atonement is, we can find out some pretty interesting things, because we know, don't we, that there are 3 tabernacles. There's a tabernacle on the earth, one in heaven, and us corporately and individually as temples of the Ruach. An atonement has to be made in each of those places, according to the sacrifices that we saw at the beginning of the book of Leviticus, because every single one of those sacrifices is used to make atonement, to cleanse us. Leviticus 1 verse 4 says, he shall lay his hand on the head of the olah, and it shall be accepted on his behalf to kafar for him. Okay, so burnt offering will make atonement, or will cleanse you, put the covering of cleanliness over you. 1 Samuel 3:11-14 says, and Yehovah said to Shemuel, see, I am doing a matter in Yisrael at which both ears of everyone who hears it shall tingle. In that day I shall confirm against Eli that I have spoken, all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I have declared to him that I am judging his house forever for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons cursed Elohim, and he did not rebuke them. And therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that the iniquity of the house of Eli shall never be atoned for by sacrifice or by mincha. Okay, so the mincha can atone for you too. He shall do with the bull as he did with the bull as a sin offering, a chata'at, and he shall do it, and the priest shall kafar for them, and it shall be forgiven them. He shall bring the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. It is a sin offering for the assemblies. The sin offerings, probably the one that we would think the sin offering makes atonement for you. The sin offering does indeed make atonement. And it shall be when he is guilty of one of these, that he shall confess that in which he sinned, and he shall bring his guilt offering to Yehovah for the sin which he has sinned, a female from the flock, a lamb or a female goat as a chata'at, and the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin. And we see in multiple places a guilt offering being used to make atonement. In the millennial kingdom, the instructions are 1 lamb from a flock and from 200, and the watered pastures of Israel for mincha, for an olah, for shlamim, to kafar for them. So there you go. Those 3 offerings will all kafar for you. All the people of the land are to give this terumah to the prince in Israel, and on the prince are the olot, the minchat, drink offerings, the festival, the chodeshim, the Sabbaths, and all the appointed times of the house of Yisrael. He's to prepare the chata'at and the mincha and the shlamim to kafar for the house of Yisrael. So all of them are mentioned there, apart from the guilt offering. And we see multiple places, and we will see as we go through that the guilt offering does make atonement for you. So every single one of the offerings in the earthly tabernacle will make atonement for you before Yehovah. So what we should expect to see, all of those offerings happening in the heavenly tabernacle, and then making atonement for us in particular ways. These all make atonement for you in particular ways. See that happening in the heavenly tabernacle, and also we'll see it in us when we offer spiritual sacrifices. Those spiritual sacrifices actually make atonement for us, because we've got the Ruach Kodesh dwelling inside of us. So we need to keep ourselves clean. Okay, he gives us a new heart and a new spirit he puts within us. But how do we keep that clean? How do we keep it acceptable before him so that we will be presented spotless and blameless before him? Well, understanding what's going on in the earthly tabernacle is the key to all of it. Hebrews 9 verse 13 said, "For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the defiled sets apart for the cleansing of the flesh, these were all for atonement." The ashes of the heifer was a particularly special one, the red heifer sacrifice. So I won't look at that again. But these sacrifices were for the cleansing of the flesh. The blood was for the cleansing of the flesh. It was to make atonement, to make the flesh clean. Leviticus 15 verse 2. Okay, when we read through this and we look at uncleanness, we don't tend to associate it with atonement at all. Okay, we think unclean, that's one thing, that's over here. Atonement, that's different, that's something that was going on with the animal sacrifices. Leviticus 15 verse 2 says, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any man has a discharge from his flesh, his discharge is unclean. And when he who has a discharge is cleansed of his discharge, he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing. He shall wash his garments and shall bathe his flesh in running water and be clean. On the 8th day, he takes for himself 2 turtle doves, 2 young pigeons, shall come into the presence of Yehovah to the door of the tent of meeting, shall give them to the priest. The priest shall prepare them, the one as a chata'at, the other as an olah, and the priest shall kafar for him because of his discharge. Not because of any sin that he did, because he had the discharge. And the discharge is a result of us being in this fallen world, surrounded by uncleannesses and things by which we can become defiled. So in order to atone for that, or to kafar for that, we offer a sin offering and olahs also. Leviticus 15, 28 to 30 says, "But if she is cleansed of her discharge, then she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she's clean. And on the 8th day she takes for herself 2 turtle doves and 2 young pigeons, and shall bring them to the priest to the door of the tent of meeting. The priest prepares one as a chata'at and the other as an olah. And the priest shall kafar for her in the presence of Yehovah for the discharge of all her tumah." This is a word that we're going to see numerous times, the tumah of the children of Israel. Leviticus 15 verse 31, all of the rest of those were just taken from Leviticus 15. As you go through, the instructions are given you, have some kind of way of cleansing yourself, washing yourself with water or whatever, then atonement is made for you. And then this is given as the reason that these atonements have to be made. "Thus you shall separate the children of Israel from their tumah, lest they die in their tumah when they make my dwelling place tameh, unclean, which is in their midst." So again, it's all about the fact that he's dwelling physically on the earth, which is interesting because he also dwells in heaven. And atonement needs to be made in heaven. And he also dwells in us. He dwells in us as temples of the Ruach. So that's why atonement needs to be made there. Leviticus 14, 14 to 20 says, "The priest shall take some of the blood of the asham, and the priest shall put it on the tip of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot. The priest shall take some of the log of oil and pour it on the palm of his own left hand. And the priest shall dip his right finger in the oil that's on his left hand, and shall sprinkle some of the oil with his finger 7 times before Yehovah. And of the rest of the oil in his hand, the priest puts some on the tip of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot, and on the blood of the asham. The rest of the oil that's in the priest's hand, he puts on the head of him who is to be cleansed. And the priest shall kafar for him before Yehovah, and he is then clean. The priest shall make the chata'at and kafar for him who is to be cleansed from his tumah. Afterwards he slaughters the burnt offering, the olah. The priest shall offer the olah and the mincha on the altar, and the priest shall kafar for him, and so he shall be clean. This entire thing is needed for him to be in an acceptable state for Yehovah to dwell in the midst of the children of Israel. They all had to be in this state for Yehovah to actually be there at all. Hebrews 10:22, and according to the Torah, almost all is cleansed with blood, and without shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. Forgiveness and atonement are concepts that kind of get mixed up a little bit. And we'll see that. So, having seen how it's done in the earthly tabernacle, we can now understand when we see how it's being done in the heavenly tabernacle by Yeshua. I'll give you a choice at this point. This next bit might well be 20 minutes long. This is quite dense stuff, but it tells us a lot. And I'd rather go through it more slowly in smaller bits and for everybody to get it and be like, yeah, I've got it, rather than try to endure through a part. So does anyone have any kind of preference as to what we look at? You want a break? No? Okay. Revelation 15 verse 5 says, and after this I looked and saw the temple of the dwelling place of witness in the heaven was opened. Okay, so this is the word skene. Skene in Greek means Mishkan, means dwelling place. Again, it's talking about where he dwells. The word for temple's there as well, but it specifically says that it's about where he dwells. And Hebrews 8 tells us about this place. It says, it was necessary then that the copies of the heavenly ones should be cleansed with these. That's the stuff on earth. Atonement had to be made for the stuff on earth. But the heavenly ones themselves with better sacrifices than these. So what they were a picture of in the heavens also had to be cleansed. For Messiah has not entered into a set apart place made by hand, figures of the true, but into the heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of Elohim on our behalf. So this is what the priests would do, wouldn't they? When you brought the animal to them, you killed the animal, or whoever killed the animal changes, then the priests would draw near to the presence of Yehovah. That's what Messiah did, okay, with the blood that was to make atonement, which was his blood. Hebrews 9:11-14 says, but Messiah, having become a high priest of the coming good matters, through the greater and more perfect skene, Mishkan, not made with hands, that is not of this creation, entered into the most set apart place once for all, not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood, having obtained everlasting redemption. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the defiled sets apart for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Messiah, who through the everlasting Spirit offered himself unblemished to Elohim, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living Elohim. So this is what atonement is made for in the heavenly realm. And we need to understand this word. As I said, it's very difficult to trace atonement through from the Old Testament to the New Testament, because what you tend to get, this word hilasmos, an appeasing, propitiating, the means of appeasing, propitiation. And a lot of the New Testament, when you read it, you think, this is just new doctrine that's being taught here. But none of it is new doctrine at all. All of it is the Torah. And what we need to do is understand. So when it says things like, he is a propitiation for our sins, we need to understand what it's actually saying, because it's all just the Torah, every single bit of it. Daniel 9:9-10 says, to the Lord our God are the compassions, and then it uses the word hilasmos in the Septuagint, for we separated from Yehovah. Okay, so it talks about this separation, which atonement is needed to bridge the gap, basically. This is what it says in the Septuagint. I'll show you what it says in the Hebrew, because they're taking the implication of atonement. We hearken not to the voice of Yehovah our God to go by his laws which he executed before our face by the hands of his bondsmen, the prophets. Okay, but Septuagint, when you to recognize the word hilasmos is atonements. In the Hebrew, it says, to Yehovah our Elohim are the compassions and forgivenesses, for we have rebelled against him, not separated from him. It's different. Okay, he's forgiven us because we've rebelled against him, not he's made atonements for us because we're separated from him. Theologically, very different. And we have not obeyed the voice of Yehovah our Elohim to walk in his Torah, which he set before us through his servants, the prophets. In Ezekiel 44, again talking of the millennial kingdom in the Septuagint, after his being cleansed, 7 days he shall count to himself. This is a literal word-for-word translation. Whichever day he should enter into the courtyard inner to minister in the holy place, he shall bring a hilasmos. Okay, so in order to enter in after his cleansing, he needs to bring an atonement, because atonement is going to complete his cleansing. Ezekiel 44, 26 to 27 in the Hebrew says, after his cleansing, they count 7 days for him. And on that day, he comes into the inner court of the set-apart place to attend in the set-apart place. He brings his chata'at. So you see how in the Greek, they go straight to, it's his atonement. That's what it is, because that's kind of what it's doing. In the Hebrew, it says they bring a sin offering. And those concepts should be synonymous in our minds. The sin offering is to make atonement, and the Greek, from what I can see, have just gone right to he shall bring his atonement instead of his chata'at. Psalm 133 to 4 says, if lawless deeds you should closely watch, O Lord, who shall stand? For by you hilasmos is. That's what it says in the Greek. Psalm 133 to 4, O Yah, if you should watch iniquities, O Yehovah, who would stand? But with you there is forgiveness, that you might be feared. So again, there's, instead of the word hilasmos, atonement, it's forgiveness. Leviticus 25:9, and you shall declare by trumpet sound in all your land, in the 7th month, the 10th of the month, in the day of your making hilasmos, the 10th of the month, what's that? It's Yom Kippur. The day of your making hilasmos, you're making atonement. You shall declare by trumpet in all your land. And it's the same in the Hebrew, of course, we know. Numbers 5, 6 to 8 says, speak to the sons of Yisrael, saying, a man or woman, whoever should commit of all sins of mankind, and ignoring should ignore and should trespass. That's all. And this is very interesting. This is talking about a sin made in error, a sin made by mistake, as it's saying in the Hebrew. But it says here that what the person's doing is ignoring the Torah. And this is kind of what I was trying to get into about a sin made by mistake isn't necessarily one that you never intended to do. It's one that you won't. It's one that you repent of. You recognize it as a mistake and you turn from it. So this person is recognized in the Greek as ignoring this. He should declare openly the sin which he did, and shall give for the trespass offering the total sum, the 5th part of it he shall add unto it and give back to whomever he trespassed against him. But if there might not be to the man acting as next of kin, so as to give to him, and says, let the trespass offering being given to Yehovah for the priests be beside the ram of hilasmos. Okay, so here it's recognized as the ram of atonement, because I'm going to show you the scripture that this is actually referring to. And in the Hebrew it's the same. Okay, it calls it the ram of atonement. Doesn't talk about him ignoring it. But this is the scripture that it's making reference to. This is in Numbers 5, but it's making reference to a law that's already been given. And that law already given was in Leviticus 5. Yehovah spoke to Moshe saying, when a soul commits a trespass, is sin by mistake against the set-apart matters of Yehovah, then he shall bring to Yehovah as his guilt offering a ram. Or it called it the ram of hilasmos, the ram of atonement. It even called it the ram of atonement in the Hebrew as well. Here it's just the guilt offering. These things should be interchangeable in our mind. When we hear about a guilt offering being brought or whatever, we should just think, well, that's the means of atoning. It's the means of us coming back and being acceptable to Yehovah. He should make good for the sin he's done, and he should add 1/5 to it and give it to the priest. The priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering. And then it's just condensed in the Greek and in the Hebrew to the ram of atonement. In Amos 8:4, it says, the one swearing by an oath according to the hilasmos of Samaria. Okay, the atonement of Samaria is what it says in the Greek. But in the Hebrew, it says those swearing by the guilt of Shomeron. So what's going on there? Well, we can see that it refers to the atonement. Sometimes when it refers to the atonement in the Greek, it's referring to an actual offering in the Hebrew. Well, ashma, just like asham, can mean guilt. It can also mean guilt offering. So from understanding that it's saying atonement in the Septuagint, we can see that this has actually been incorrectly translated, and it should be so those swearing by the guilt offering of Samaria. So we get now to the New Testament. Now that we see how hilasmos is used throughout the Septuagint and its meaning atonement, now we can understand it in its context in the New Testament. The verses that I'm going to put up, as usual, are going to be taken from the ISR version, and they actually do a pretty good job with translation. My little children, I write this to you so that you do not sin. If anyone sins, we have an intercessor with the Father, Yeshua Messiah, a righteous one. And he himself is an atoning offering. He himself is a hilasmos for our sins. Most translations are going to say something like, he himself is a propitiation for our sins. And you think, what on earth is a propitiation? And you go to Strong's, to Blue Letter Bible, and it doesn't really tell you anything. It says an appeasing or a propitiation. It's an atoning offering. That's what it is. This is theologically significant because it's telling us that he atones. And now that we understand what it is to make atonement, we can understand exactly what Yeshua was to us. 1 John 4:10 says, in this is love, that we have loved Elohim. Not that we've loved Elohim, but he's loved us and sent his son to be a hilasmos for our sins. So he's the hilasmos. The hilasmos, the atoning offering, is kind of like, as we've seen, a catch-all term for the animal sacrifices, for each offering. And he wasn't just an atoning offering umbrella term, he was also each one of the offerings. Okay, this word is hilasterion. This says an expiatory place or thing, i.e. concretely an atoning victim, or specifically the lid of the ark in the temple. Which is interesting. This word is used of Yeshua, but it's also used to describe the mercy seat when it's written in Greek. Okay, above it, the cherubim of his theme were overshadowing the place of atonement, the mercy seat, about which we do not now speak in detail. And in Romans 3:23, it uses this same word, which means mercy seat or place of atonement. It says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of Elohim, for being declared right without paying by his favor, by his grace, through the redemption that is in Messiah Yeshua, whom Elohim set forth as a hilasterion, as a mercy seat, through belief in his blood. And this is going to be important. When we get into the second part, the fact that he was an atoning sacrifice through belief in his blood. Why is belief in his blood important? We'll explore that. To demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he is righteous and declares righteous the one who has belief in Yeshua. Having belief in Yeshua, having belief in his blood, he is an atoning sacrifice. Now I found this, I thought that this was interesting. We've looked at the Chinese characters before and about how they tell the story of Genesis and various other things. This is the character for righteousness in Chinese, and it's the word for I or me covered by the Lamb. Thought that was interesting. Luke 22:42 says, saying, Father, if you be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And we've looked at the concept of the olah being the burnt offering, all being burnt up, giving everything. And this is not Yeshua being the burnt offering in the heavenly realm. This is Yeshua giving us the example of how to be the burnt offering in the temple of the Ruach. Okay. However, he did say, do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. What is the burnt offering? It's the olah from Allah, which means to ascend. It's an ascending offering in a lot of translations. Don't touch me, I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my Elohim and your Elohim. Okay, so having been offered, he then ascended to the Father. He wasn't an ascending offering. Ephesians 5 verse 2. And when we go through the New Testament, again, we just need to bear in mind that all of it is Torah, and we need to understand what's written there. But because it's written in Greek, that kind of gives us a little bit of separation. It says, walk in love as Messiah also loved us and gave himself for us a gift, a prasphara, and an offering to Elohim for a sweet-smelling fragrance, euodia. Okay? We read it in the Greek, and I don't even know how this is translated most times, but this is how they do it in the Scriptures version. He was a prasphara. What was a mincha? A mincha, what did it mean? It was a present. It was a gift. Present or a gift. That's what mincha means. So he was a prasphara, and as a prasphara, he was a sweet-smelling fragrance. Okay? A euodia. Remember the word euodia. In Leviticus 2 verse 9 it says, the priest shall take from the mincha a remembrance portion and katar it on the altar, and isha, a sweet fragrance to Yehovah. That's what the mincha is. It's a sweet fragrance to Yehovah. And if we look at it in the Greek, it's a euodia. So this is what Yeshua was. Paul is specifically saying he was the mincha offering. To anybody who knew the Torah, that's exactly what he was saying to them. Okay, the shalem, we looked at the shlemim, didn't we? The peace offerings. Shalem says peace offering, requital, sacrifice for alliance or friendship, which is interesting because we know what it represents for us in the temple of the Ruach is our relations with one another and being at peace, making reconciliation with one another. It can also be a voluntary sacrifice of thanks. And this is going to be interesting because when we consider how was Yeshua our shlemim or our shalem, how was that? Was he an offering of thanks to Yehovah? We say, thanks Yehovah, we've killed your son. He wasn't a thanks offering. Okay. From this word, which is shalom. Shalom, to be in, it's a verb, it's something you do, to be in a covenant of peace or be at peace, to make peace with, to be complete, to be finished, which is actually what I would suggest that Yeshua was making reference to when he said it is finished, rather than that's something that they said when they were in the temple. I've never been able to find a source for that. It's just something that I heard somebody say once, and I believed that for a long time. I don't think that that's what he was making reference to. If anything that I can find in the scriptures, this, although I'm not saying that this is what he was making reference to. But it's interesting, isn't it, what the verb means, that the peace offering is the name for what it does. To be in a covenant of peace with, be at peace with, to make peace. And of course that's relevant for our spiritual offerings. Leviticus 7:11-12 says, and this is the Torah of the Zevach HaShlamim, which is brought to Yehovah. If he brings it for a thanksgiving, okay, so one of the things that the peace offering could be brought for was to thank Yehovah. He's done something in your life, you want to thank him, you bring a peace offering. Leviticus 7 verse 16 gives us the other two. It says, if the offering he brings is a vow or a voluntary offering. Okay, so with Yeshua, it wasn't a thanks offering. It wasn't a way to thank Yehovah. It wasn't a vow either. Okay? Yeshua's death was a voluntary offering. Because of this, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to receive it again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. Okay? It's a voluntary offering. Judges 20 verse 26 shows us this sort of way that the peace offering was used. In this narrative, they were getting beaten by the children of Dan. They kept going out to battle against them, and they kept getting beaten. Okay, and this is like the second time that they come back, and they keep coming back and saying to Yehovah, should we go out to battle against them? And he says, yes. This time they return. All the children of Israel, even all the people, went up and came to Bethel and wept and sat there in the presence of Yehovah, fasted that day until evening, and they offered olot and shlamim before Yehovah. Okay, it was to make peace, make reconciliation with him. That's what they were trying to do here. Now, this is the Greek word for peace. It is eirene. Eirene. I'll point this out. It says the way that leads to peace or salvation. And this is very interesting because in the Septuagint version, we've got two words that are used for peace offering. One of them means salvation offering, and one of them means more commonly peace, to do with peace. But this actually links the two of them together. And then we've got this, eirenikos. Eirenikos means relating to peace, peaceable, pacific, as in pacifying, loving peace, bringing peace with it, peaceful or salutary. This is the word that's used in the Septuagint when it's not a salvation offering for peace offering. So when you see the word eirenikos, it means peace offering, or it used to mean peace offering. 1 Samuel 10 verse 8, okay, they went whole burnt offerings and eirenikos, peace offerings. Okay, again, peace offerings, eirenikos in 2 Samuel 6:17. In Deuteronomy 2 verse 26, we see eirenikos used in a very interesting concept when we consider us making eirenikos with one another. Okay, when we make peace offerings to one another. I sent ambassadors from the wilderness of Kedemoth to Sihon, king of Heshbon, with peaceable words, with eirenikos words, peace offerings, words of peace offerings. Genesis 37 verse 4 about Joseph says, and his brethren, having seen his father loved him more than all his sons, hated him and could not speak any eirenikos to him. Psalm 120 verse 7, I was eirenikos among them that hated eirene. I was peaceable to those who hated peace. But again, it's this word for peace offering, and this is what we do in us as the temple of the Ruach. This is a word we'll be familiar with, shalom. Okay, shalom is a noun. It's a name for the concept peace. Interestingly, it can refer to peace, friendship of human relationships, okay, as well, which is why I rendered it as sacrifices of shaloms. It kind of makes sense like that. Ephesians 2:13-17 shows us how Yeshua is our peace offering, or an aspect of it. But now in Messiah Yeshua, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Messiah. And we looked at how this is all temple talk, drawing near with blood. For he is our eirene, who is made both one, having broken down the partition of the barrier, having abolished in his flesh his sarks, and we're going to look at that in the second part about how that means us as a body, the enmity, the Torah of the commands in dogma, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making eirene. To completely reconcile is a verb, apokatalasso, to apokatalasso, both of them unto Elohim. So to make reconciliation, to completely reconcile. Katalasso means to reconcile, apokatalasso means to completely reconcile. In one body through the cross, again, us is the body of Mashiach. Having destroyed the enmity by it, he made eirene, having destroyed the enmity. Okay, this is what making peace is. And having come, he brought as good news, eirene to you who are far off, and eirene to those near. So apokatalasso, to reconcile completely, to reconcile back again, from katalasso, and katalasso means to reconcile. So we're going to see these words in the New Testament. And then when we see these words, we go, that's the peace offering. That katalassoing, or the apokatalassoing, with us and Elohim is the peace offering. Colossians 1:17-23 says, he is before all, and in him all hold together. He is the head of the body, the assembly, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that he might become the one who is first in all. For it pleased the Father that in him should all fullness dwell, and through him to apokatalasso all to himself, whether on earth or in the heavens, having made peace, eirene poieo, through the blood of his cross. Okay, so through his blood, which makes atonement for us. How does it make atonement? As a peace offering. What is the result of that? He apokatalassoed us to himself. He made this reconciliation. And you who once were estranged and enemies in the mind by wicked works, but now he is apokatalassoed in the body of his flesh through death, to present you set apart, blameless, unreprovable before him. And those sort of phrases are things that we'll understand when we get into the second part. How are we to be presented spotless and blameless before him? And are these just flowery words, or are they the Torah being explained? If indeed you continue in the belief, founded and steadfast, and are not moved away from the expectation of the good news. Okay, so this word is katalage, and it's a noun. Okay, you've got to reconcile is a verb. If you reconcile something, you're doing something. If you make peace, or reconciliation is a concept, isn't it? To reconcile is a verb, reconciliation is a noun. So katalage, when we see that, that's referring to having made reconciliation. Adjustment of a difference, reconciliation, restoration to favor. And again, when we see these things, we go to Strong's, we think, what does it actually mean though? Is this just completely new stuff to the Torah? Okay, exchange, figuratively adjustment, i.e. restoration to the divine favor, has the word atonement here, reconciliation, but it's not atonement generally. It is a specific type of atonement through the peace offering. So they kind of get it right on these sort of things, but we need to understand it. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 11 said, but if she is indeed separated, let her remain unmarried or be katalassoed with her husband. So we see your regular everyday usage of this word. Okay, let her be katalassoed with her husband. Romans 4:20 to 5:11 says, he did not hesitate about the promise of Elohim through unbelief. This is Abraham. But was strengthened in belief, giving esteem to Elohim, and being completely persuaded that what he had promised he was able to do. Therefore it was reckoned to him for righteousness, his belief being reckoned to him as righteousness. And not because of him alone was it written that it was reckoned to him, but also because of us, of whom it shall be reckoned to us who believe in him, who raised up Yeshua our Master from the dead, who was delivered up because of our trespasses and was raised up for us to be declared right, for this reconciliation to be made. Therefore, having been declared right by belief, we have Acharei with Elohim through our Master Yeshua Messiah. You read that, and if you don't know what the Torah says, you think, well, how do we have peace with Elohim? Do we have peace? Is that theologically sound? Is that actually scriptural that we would have peace? It's talking about him as an offering for reconciliation. Through whom also we have access by belief into this favor in which we stand, and we exult in the expectation of the glory of Elohim. And not only this, but we also exult in pressures, knowing that pressure works endurance, and endurance approvedness. It makes you approved before Elohim, and approvedness, expectation. And expectation does not disappoint, because the love of Elohim has been poured out in our hearts by the set-apart spirit, which was given to us. Hold on to that set-apart spirit in our hearts. For when we were still weak, Messiah in due time died for the wicked. For one shall hardly die for a righteous one, though possibly for a good one someone would even have the courage to die. But Elohim proves his own love for us in that while we were still sinners, we're not still sinners now, while we were though, Messiah died for us. Much more then, having now been declared right by his blood, again, it's atonement that's being talked of here, we shall be saved from wrath through him. For if being enemies, we have been katalassoed with Elohim through the death of his son, much more having been katalassoed, we shall be saved by his life. So when we go through these things now, we can see, okay, this entire passage is about him as a peace offering and the atonement that is brought through the peace offering. Not only this, but we also exalt in Elohim through our Master Yeshua Messiah, through whom we have now received the katalage, the reconciliation. Romans 11:11 to 15 says, I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Let it not be, but by their fall deliverance has come to the Gentiles to provoke them to jealousy. And if their fall is riches for the world and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more their completeness? But I speak to you, the Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I esteem my service. If somehow I might provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh and save some of them. For if their casting away is the katalage of the world, what is their acceptance but life from the dead? Technical terms being used. 2 Corinthians 5:17 to 21. And we're kind of coming to an end, maybe 6 more slides. Therefore, if anyone is in Messiah, he is a new creature. The old matters have passed away. See, all matters have become new. Like the new heavens and the new earth. We didn't disappear and get destroyed and then something new appeared. They've all become new. He makes everything new. All matters are from Elohim, who has katalassoed us with himself through Yeshua Messiah and has given us the ministry of katalage, reconciliation. That is, that Elohim was in Messiah katalassoing the world unto himself, not reckoning their trespasses to them, and he has committed to us the word of katalage. Therefore, we are envoys on behalf of Messiah, as though Elohim were pleading through us. We beg on behalf of Messiah, be katalassoed with Elohim. And it says, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us. And if you read that, you think, well, what does that mean? He made him to be sin? Sin's a concept. Sin's transgression of the law. It's anything not done in faith. How did he make Messiah to be transgression of the law? That's not what this is actually saying. In order to understand, he made him to be sin. It's like before when it said they trusted in the guilt of Shomaron. But it wasn't guilt. It was guilt offering, because the word can mean both things. In the Hebrew, chata'at means sin or sin offering. And it's not just in the Hebrew either. Okay, this is the apostolic polyglot, the interlinear. Okay, this is from Leviticus 4 about the sin offering. Okay, speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the sin. Offering isn't there. Okay, not there. G266 is the word that is there. Here we see it in the passage that we were just reading. Okay, it says, for he hath made him to be sin, G266, hamartia, for us who knew no sin. It's a mistranslation though. He has made him to be a sin offering. Okay, him who knew no sin, he made to be a sin offering. And we know from the Torah, as we saw before, that the chata'at is something that the priest makes atonement for him, and his sin shall be forgiven him. We looked at that as we were going through it. The sin offering. Okay, the priest will make atonement for him. Yeshua made atonement for us. He cleansed us, and we shall be forgiven of the sin. So this is how he was the sin offering. And finally, Isaiah 53 verse 10 just lays it out there, really easy for us to understand. Yehovah was pleased to crush him. He laid sickness on him, that when he made himself an offering for guilt and a sham, a guilt offering. So Yeshua was all 5 of them in the heavenly realm. What we're going to look at is us making atonement for ourselves as temples of the Ruach in the realm of the Spirit. We'll look at that in the second part. Okay, well, the importance of this matter is basically, as I was going into, in the New Testament, there's a lot of words that we just read and we don't really know what they mean. We don't trace them back to the Torah. And this actually leads to a major problem. It leads to people rejecting Paul's words and rejecting Yeshua's words as well. I had somebody contact me this week who has rejected the New Testament. And what it always boils down to with people who do this is they don't understand the things that those people wrote. And because the New Testament, I think, has been associated with the law being done away with, particularly Paul's writings, it almost seems acceptable to people to read it and think, maybe it is saying that the law has been done away with. Or maybe this is new doctrine. Maybe this is just all garbage. But they just don't understand it. And if they can come to an understanding of it, then they would see that it's actually Torah. It's like, I don't actually understand why Elijah offered burnt offerings on Mount Carmel. He wasn't allowed to do that according to the Torah, and yet Yehovah honored it. We're going to see the verses later on that say that he's not allowed to do that anywhere other than Jerusalem. He's got to bring those things to the door of the tent of meeting. So I don't understand that, but I'm not going to turn around and say Elijah's a false prophet. But people, for some reason, seem comfortable to do those things. I think if we can understand and we can take something which is a core principle, like atonement, and we can then show all the way through the rest of the scriptures just how important atonement is. And it's actually, without atonement, none of the other scriptures make any sense. So to not understand atonement, you don't understand all of the rest of the scriptures. You don't understand what the foundation is, what the root concept which gives birth to all of those things being theologically significant is. So for us, for our walk, okay, what I'm going to kind of touch on is that we don't actually need to know any of that in order to make atonement for ourselves. Because if we just shema the word, if we just do what it says to do, we don't actually need to understand that. Okay, because we will be making atonement. We won't understand that we're making atonement and that that's what it is, and that we're making ourselves clean as temples of the Ruach, and how the body of Messiah works and all of the rest of it. We just shema the word. The problem is people just don't seem to be comfortable doing that with the New Testament scriptures. They think that they are different in some way. Okay, so the spiritual sacrifices that we make atonement for us as a dwelling place of the Ruach Kodesh. Small points, it's not the Ruach HaKodesh, because that would be saying the Ruach, it would be saying the Holy Spirit. Ruach HaKodesh means the Holy Spirit. So saying the Ruach HaKodesh doesn't make any kind of sense. First offering is the Olah offering. That's how it's mentioned in Leviticus anyway, the first one. The Olah offering, and that is, as we've seen, submission to Yehovah. And without submission to Yehovah, you can't actually make any of the other offerings, because you've got to submit to him in order to be doing the rest of it. The first one that you must offer him is yourself entirely. You've come to him and you're now willing to do his will. Okay, then we've got the mincha offering, which is the present, basically the present to Yehovah. Well, that's its common usage of the word. And we can see this in caring for the poor. Essentially, what's behind the mincha offering is to do with our material goods what he asks us to do with them. So caring for the poor is probably the primary one that you can point to. And it's amazing, I looked at this either 2 or 4 weeks ago, where I was looking at the idea that Yehovah will provide for us, that he promises that he will provide for us. But people take that out of context. Yehovah says he will provide for us if we provide for those less fortunate. If we're doing that, then he promises to provide for us. Otherwise, there is no promise of his provision in Matthew 6 at least. Okay, so the mincha offering is seen in us giving to others, because the material goods that he gives to us, he, if we have submitted to him, gets to decide what it is that we do with it. And each time this comes up, I feel it's important to challenge people and say, when was the last time you gave to the poor? Do you make it a thing in your life to give to the poor? Because that underpins so much of the Torah, to give to the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, and to the poor as well. Okay, making peace with one another. We saw that the Irenikos offerings were the peace offerings, speaking peaceable words, speaking peaceably with one another. Making reconciliation is what the peace offering was about, both the one in the earthly tabernacle, the heavenly tabernacle with Yehovah, and it's about us making reconciliation with one another. Confession, or the guilt offering, okay, when you're guilty, you've done something, actually acknowledging maybe the scriptures do say that this is wrong, instead of always, when something is presented to us, trying to twist the scriptures around to say, oh, no, it's okay because of this scripture or that scripture, or, instead of just saying, maybe I'm guilty and maybe I need to look at myself and see what I might be doing wrong. That's followed by repentance, the sin offering. And by doing all of these, okay, we make atonement for ourselves. And what did it mean to make atonement? It means we cleanse ourselves. We make that area that Yehovah has come to dwell in, we make it clean, okay? And the temple of the Ruach is us individually, and it's us corporately as well. So we need to be doing these things as a part of the body to make the body itself clean and an acceptable place for Yehovah to dwell. Ephesians 5:25-27, husbands, love your wives as Messiah also did love the assembly and gave himself for it, in order to cleanse it with the washing of the water by the word. All of those things, all of those offerings, if you are doing the word, your plain understanding of doing the word, then you will be making atonement for yourself. And that's why, if you do those things, you'll be fine. If you just Shema, you'll be fine. But it's also why, if you don't do those things, you will not be fine. Okay, you need to keep that temple clean. It says, doesn't it? If you destroy the temple of Elohim, him Elohim will destroy. Okay, so that's why that is the case. We can tell people that, but maybe if they understand where they're actually at, it would make a difference. Probably not. In order to present it to himself a splendid assembly, not having spot or wrinkle or any of this sort, but that it might be set apart and blameless. Okay, so he made atonement in heaven. He made atonement in the realm of the conscience. And I can also entertain the idea that making atonement in heaven will allow for us to actually appear in heaven before him as the first fruits offerings or the other things that we see in Revelation. I can allow for that. But he cleansed us, okay? But in order for us to be presented to him as coming spotless, set apart, blameless, all the other words that are used of how we are to be it is coming, we need to make those atonements and keep ourselves in a state of being atoned for. He's done the first bit, we do the bit after that, by his Spirit. 1 Corinthians 6:19, do you not know that your body is the dwelling place of the set apart Spirit who is in you, which you have from Elohim, and you are not your own? Okay, and that's your burnt offering, isn't it? You're not your own. Okay, you've submitted to him. You've offered yourself entirely to him. Ephesians 2:19-22 says, so then you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the set apart ones and members of the household of Elohim, having been built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Yeshua Messiah himself being the chief cornerstone. So Yeshua, the chief cornerstone, the foundation, the apostles and prophets, in whom all the building being joined together grows into a set apart temple in Yehovah, in whom you also are being built together into a habitation of Elohim in the Spirit. Okay, the body is a habitation of Elohim, and it's built on Yeshua Messiah. You're going to see Yeshua Messiah being the chief cornerstone. He's also used idiomatically as the head of the body. We're the body, and he is the head. It's all idiomatic language that's showing us the same thing. We're built up as a temple. He is the chief cornerstone of that temple of the Ruach. Hebrews 10:16-22 says, this is the covenant that I shall make with them after those days, says Yehovah, giving my laws into their hearts, and in their minds I shall write them, and their sins and their lawlessnesses I shall remember no more. Now where there is forgiveness of these, there is no longer a sacrifice for sin. So brothers, having boldness to enter into the set apart place by the blood of Yeshua. Wait there. Enter into the set apart place. That doesn't end well, does it? Nadab and Abihu entered into the Holy of Holies. Didn't end well for them. We're not going to just beam up to heaven and say, I now have boldness to enter into the set apart place. So what's it talking about? Well, there's a third temple, isn't there? There's us. There's the temple of the Ruach. And that's, as it turns out, what this is talking about. by a new and living way which he instituted for us. Okay, how did he do that? Through the veil, that is his flesh, and the word is sarx. Okay, so what is his flesh? Is sarx. Because we are members of his body, of his sarx, and of his bones. Okay, so it refers to his body. We saw the other scripture before where it refers to his body as well. So now we're entering into the Holy of Holies through this new and living way which he created for us as members of his body. For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one sarx. This secret is great, but I speak concerning the Messiah and the assembly. We are members of his sarx, having become one with him as his body. Colossians 1:18-23 says, and he is the head of the body, the assembly, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that he might become the one who is first in all. For it pleased the Father that in him should all fullness dwell, and through him to apokatallasso all to himself, whether on earth or in the heavens, having a reino poieo through the blood of his cross. He's made peace, the verb to make peace with someone. And you who were once estranged and enemies in the mind by wicked works, but now he has apokatalassoed you in the body of his sarx through death, to present you set apart and blameless and unreprovable before him. Okay, so now we're members of his body. Okay, we can enter into the Holy of Holies there. We need to make atonement like the priest would make atonement when he would enter into the Holy of Holies. We need to keep the temple clean. You'd make atonement for the altar that was outside the temple, for the golden altar of incense inside the temple, for the Holy of Holies. You had to make atonement for all the parts of the temple. So it continues, having a high priest over the house of Elohim. Well, we learned before that we are the house of Elohim. So he is high priest in heaven where the angels minister, but he's the head of the body, he's the chief cornerstone, he's the high priest, and we are priests in the temple of the Ruach. Let us draw near with a true heart and completeness of belief, having our hearts sprinkled from a wicked conscience, and our bodies washed with clean water. 1 Peter 1 verse 22 says, now that you've cleansed your lives in obeying the truth, through the Spirit to unfeigned brotherly love, love one another fervently with a clean heart. What does it say though? It says, now that you've cleansed your sucha is your soul, okay, in obeying the truth through the pneuma, the Spirit. In the King James Version, we get a bit of a clearer view of what's going on. Seeing ye have purified your soul, okay, your soul. You've purified your soul by obeying the truth, by obeying the Torah. You've purified it. You've made atonement for it. Now see that you love one another with a pure heart fervently. So Peter continues, now that you've cleansed your soul in obeying the truth through the Spirit. Okay, the soul and the spirit are bound up together, aren't they? The word of God can separate them. To unfeigned brotherly love, love one another with a clean heart. That's for us individually. Remember, where the set apart spirit, where the spirit of holiness dwells. Okay, we make atonement. With a clean heart, having been reborn, not of corruptible seed, but incorruptible, through the living word of Elohim, which remains forever. Because all flesh is as grass, and all the esteem of man is as the flower of grass. The grass withers and its flower falls away. But the word of Elohim remains forever, and this is the word announced as good news to you. So all of this is talking about making atonement in us as the temple. And we'll see that as we go on. Having put aside then all evil, all deceit, hypocrisies, envyings, all evil words, your peace offering, as newborn babes, desire the unadulterated milk of the word in order that you grow by it. Indeed, if you have tasted that the master is good, drawing near to him a stone rejected indeed by men, but chosen by Elohim and precious, you also as living stones are being built up a spiritual house, a set apart priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to Elohim through Yeshua Messiah. So all that Peter is talking about in this passage is us serving as priests in the temple of the Ruach. Now that you have cleansed your sucha, now that you've cleansed your soul, okay, you're being built up as a spiritual house. Now that you've cleansed yourself. Because it is contained in the scripture, see, I lay in Sion a chief cornerstone, chosen precious, and he who believes on him shall by no means be put to shame. This preciousness then is for you who believe, but to those who are disobedient, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. So you believe, you're obedient. You don't believe, you're disobedient, scripturally speaking. Stone of stumbling and a rock that makes for falling, who stumble because they are disobedient to the word to which they were also appointed. Okay, so for us, like I said, it doesn't matter whether we know that we're making atonement for ourselves or not. All of the context of that makes so much more sense when we understand that that's what we're actually doing. But we don't need to know that. All we need to do is be obedient to the word. The reason that these people will fall is because they're disobedient to the word and they're not cleansing their souls. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation, a people for a possession, that you should proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who were not a people, but now the people of Elohim, who had not obtained compassion, but now obtain compassion. Beloved ones, I appeal to you as sojourners and pilgrims to abstain from fleshly lusts, which battle against the sucha, the soul. They battle against the soul. You're supposed to be cleansing your soul. The fleshly lusts cause you to disobey the word. They battle against the sucha. 2 Peter 1, 2-11 says, favor and irene, peace, from the peace offering be increased to you in the knowledge of Elohim and of Yeshua, our Master. Okay? As his divine power has given to us all we need for life and reverence through the knowledge of him who called us to esteem and uprightness. So this is what his word gives us. It gives us the ability to have life and reverence, okay, to make atonement for ourselves, to be this temple. It's all that we need is right there in the word. All we need to do is obey it. But the knowledge of Elohim and Yeshua, our Master, be increased. Through these that have been given to us exceedingly great and precious promises, so that you might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption in the world caused by lust. This is what atonement does, isn't it? It makes you clean from the uncleanness that is around you, from the corruption that is in the world, in the fallen world. Yehovah wants to go and dwell in the tabernacle. He's got to cleanse it of all the corruption, all of the uncleanness. He's given us all we need for life and reverence. We've escaped from that corruption. For this reason, do your utmost to add to your belief uprightness, to uprightness knowledge. We've looked at this before. And then you've got your faith. Add to it the desire to be upright, uprightness in yourself. But you don't just have your own morality. You don't just decide for yourself what is upright. Add to your uprightness and your desire to do what is good, knowledge. And once you've added that knowledge, add self-control, because once you know what he wants you to do, you're going to need to control yourself so that you actually do it. Once you're doing it, make sure you keep doing it. And this leads to reverence for him. We've spoken before about if you shema the word, if you trust and obey the word, you will re'eh, you'll understand who he is. And it does lead to a reverence of him, to follow his word. To reverence brotherly affection. Okay, this is your peace offering. And to brotherly affection, love. Okay, and we know, again, what's love? Love is patient, love is kind, etc., etc. It's your peace offering. But if these are in you and increase, they cause you to be neither inactive nor without fruit in the knowledge of our Master Yeshua Messiah. For he in whom these are not present is blind, being short-sighted, and has forgotten that he's been cleansed from his old sin. He's been atoned for. Yeshua was our atoning offering. What did that do for us? It cleansed us of our sin. We read in the scriptures, he cleansed us of our sin, and we have no idea why. We don't know what mechanism by which that happened, but now we do. But if you don't go on in the word, if you don't continue to do these things and make atonement for yourself, it's like you've forgotten that you were cleansed of your own sin, and you don't keep yourself clean. For this reason, brothers, all the more do your utmost to make firm your calling and choosing. For if you're doing these matters, you shall never stumble at all. You don't have to worry about, I need to remember what it was to be katalasod to Yehovah and all that. That doesn't matter. What's important to us is that we see it all goes back to the Torah. And if we can only take one thing away, we take that we are cleansed by doing those things. And there's an actual reason why we've got to do this, and a reason why if we don't do these things, then it doesn't end well for us. It's just kind of deterministic. That's the way it has to happen. You will not be presented to Yeshua spotless and blameless unless you make atonement for yourself through the same sacrifices that you see in the Torah. In this way, an entrance into the everlasting kingdom of our Master and Savior Yeshua Messiah shall be richly supplied to you. You've got to do it. Without doing that, you don't end up in the right place. Romans 3:23-26 says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the esteem of Elohim, being declared right without paying us by his favor through the redemption which is in Messiah Yeshua, whom Elohim set forth as an atonement." Okay, this is what he's done for us. He's cleansed us in all these ways through belief in his blood, to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his tolerance Elohim had passed over the sins that had taken place before, to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he is righteous and declares righteous the one who has belief in Yeshua. How does he declare him righteous? He's an atoning offering. He is made right. That's what it is to be declared righteous. He's justified, you'll see in some translations. He is made right before Elohim. And it's through belief in his blood. Okay, so he is righteous and declares righteous the one who has belief in his blood as the atoning offering. This is where people stumble with things like Paul's letters. Paul is prefacing all of this by saying, listen, everyone needs atonement. There's not a single person on the planet who needs atonement. You can become as good a person as you want. You can do as much Torah as you want to do. But because you need atonement, you need Yeshua. Romans 9:30-32 says, "What shall we say then, that Gentiles, not following after righteousness, have obtained righteousness, even the righteousness of belief?" Gentiles didn't do the law, did they? They didn't have the law to do. And yet somehow the Gentiles have found themselves in a position where they're declared righteous. But Yisrael, following after the Torah of righteousness, has not arrived at the Torah of righteousness. So they had the law, but there was a problem. So what was the problem? It wasn't of belief, but by works of Torah. Okay, which Paul has prefaced in Romans by saying, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Okay, people love to take snippets of Paul that they don't understand and say, well, what's he saying here? It was not of belief. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. You need an atoning offering. That atoning offering is offered to you by belief in his blood. You need that belief in order to have the atoning offering so that you can then walk forward in righteousness from that point forward. Galatians 3:1-3. O senseless Galatians, who has bewitched you not to obey the truth, before whose eyes Yeshua Messiah was clearly portrayed among you as crucified? This only I wish to learn from you. Did you receive the Spirit by works of Torah or by the hearing of belief? You were cleansed, weren't you? Okay, and you received the Spirit. How was that? Was that because you'd done Torah so well all that time? No. The Galatians had turned from Yeshua. They'd said, we don't need Yeshua anymore. And what Paul is explaining in Galatians is, it's great that you've got the Torah, but that's not going to do anything for you. Okay, how did you get the Spirit? How were you cleansed? How was that atonement made for you? Was it because you'd done the Torah? No, it wasn't. It was by the hearing of belief. It was belief in him, which gave you the atonement and cleansed you, so that the Torah is now useful to you. Are you so senseless, having begun in the Spirit? Do you now end in the flesh? And it's amazing that Paul's letters go through all of the problems that we see right now when people have come back to following the Torah. And he addresses them all one by one. This is the people who have turned from Yeshua, turned from the writings of the New Testament, and have just decided, well, actually, all we need is Torah, because that's righteousness. Philippians 3:4-9 says, though I too might have trust in the flesh, if anyone else thinks to trust in the flesh, I more. So Paul says, okay, you're trusting in the flesh in your works of the Torah. Listen, if anyone can trust in the works of the flesh, it's me, because I did it pretty well. Circumcised the 8th day of the race of Yisrael, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, according to Torah, a Pharisee, according to ardor, that is zeal, persecuting the assembly, according to righteousness that is in the law, having become blameless. He wasn't blameless all along. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But what did he say? He said that I became blameless. I got myself right to the pinnacle of Torah. I was not sinning anymore. What he's saying is that's worthless. It's really not worth a thing before Elohim because I had sinned. But what might have been a gain to me, I have counted as loss because of Messiah. What is more, I even count all to be lost because of the excellence of the knowledge of Messiah Yeshua, my Master, for whom I have suffered the loss of all, and count them as refuge in order to gain Messiah. And be found in him, not having my own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through belief in Messiah. Not saying, let's not follow the law, the righteousness of the law. He's saying, listen, without the atoning offering, it wasn't worth anything. It's the belief in Messiah, belief in his blood, which gives us the atonement and cleanses us of all that garbage, which now allows the Torah to be something useful to us. The righteousness which is from Elohim on the basis of belief, the atonement that was given to us through Yeshua. So, we now get to this. The Torah portion itself is Leviticus 16. If we had just come to this and we didn't know what atonement was, this would take on a completely different color, a different light. Yehovah spoke to Moshe after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, as they drew near before Yehovah in his presence and died. And Yehovah said to Moshe, speak to Aaron your brother not to come in at all times to the set apart place inside the veil, before the place of atonement, in the presence of the Acharei which is on the ark, lest he die, because I appear in the place above the place of atonement. I appear above the Acharei, the most holy place ever existed on the earth. You need to come in and you need to make atonement. You need to be clean when you come in. So the high priest has to make atonement for himself so that he's in a position not to just be wiped out. And when he goes in, he's got to prepare the mercy seat where Yehovah is in a very particular way to allow him to be there. So that's the context of what we're going to see. With this, Aaron should come into the set-apart place with the blood of a young bull as a chata'at and of a ram as an olah. He should put on the set-apart linen long shirt with linen trousers on his flesh and gird himself with the linen girdle and be dressed in the linen turban. Okay, so he had special clothes that he would only wear on this one day. He would come in the high priest's garments. He would change into these special garments that would allow him to go in a particular way, like wearing a spacesuit to go into an area where Yehovah was. They are set apart garments, and he shall bathe his body in water and shall put them on. Okay, with Yeshua, Hebrews explains this to be different for Yeshua. It says, every priest taken from among men is appointed on behalf of men in matters relating to Elohim to offer both gifts and offerings for sin, being able to have a measure of feeling for those not knowing and being led astray, since he himself is also surrounded by weakness, by this uncleanness, okay, in this fallen world. The cycle of life and death going on around us. He's surrounded by this. So he needs to make atonement for himself. On account of this, he has to offer for sins as for the people, so also for himself. So it says, and from the congregation of the children of Israel, he takes 2 male goats as a chata'at and 1 ram as an olah. And Aaron shall bring the bull as a chata'at, which is for himself, and kafar for himself, cleanse himself, and for his house. And he shall take the 2 goats and let them stand in the presence of Yehovah at the door of the tent of meeting. Aaron shall cast a lot for the 2 goats, 1 lot for Yehovah and the other lot for Azazel. And this word Azazel, people get this confused. They think it's the Azazel spoken of in the book of Enoch, not the Azazel spoken of in the book of Enoch. I'm not going to go through a big long explanation of it here, but what I would say to people is load up blueletterbible.org, go to Leviticus 16:8. Look at the Gesenius' entry for Azazel, because there's a ton of really good information there that I'm not going to regurgitate. Just for purposes of this, what it means is separation. It's the goat for separation, the means by which the children of Israel are going to be separated from their sins. And Acharei shall draw near with the goat on which the lot for Yehovah fell, and shall prepare it as a chata'at. But the goat on which the lot for separation fell is caused to stand alive in the presence of Yehovah to kafar upon it, to send it into the wilderness to separation. And Acharei shall draw near with the bull of the chata'at, which is for himself, kafar for himself and for his house, and shall slaughter the bull as a chata'at, which is for himself. He shall take a fire holder filled with burning coals of fire from the altar in the presence of Yehovah. The altar in the presence of Yehovah is the golden altar, the altar of incense. It's in the holy place. The other altar is just outside. With his hands filled with sweet incense beaten fine, and shall come with it inside the veil. And he shall put the incense on the fire in the presence of Yehovah, and the cloud of the incense shall cover the kaparet which is on the witness, lest he die. And he shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on the place of atonement, on the kaparet on the east side. And interestingly, the east side is where the entrance to the tabernacle is. Okay, that's where there's a hole that goes out into the uncleanness of the world. I'm not sure if that's why it's done, but that is the case. Also in front of the kaparet, he sprinkles some of the blood with his finger 7 times. And he shall slaughter the goat of the chata'at, which is for the people, and shall bring its blood inside the veil, and shall do with that blood as he did with the blood of the bull, and sprinkle it on the place of atonement, the kaparet, in front of the place of atonement. So he comes in with an offering for himself and for his family, and for all of the rest of the children of Israel, and he makes atonement for them on this place so that Yehovah can appear there. He shall kafar for the set apart place because of the tumah of the children of Israel. This is why he's got to do it, because of their uncleanness which is all around them, and because of their transgressions and all their sins. And so he does for the tent of meeting, which is dwelling with them in the midst of their tumah. Okay, it makes more sense, doesn't it? Hebrews 9:24-28 says, for Messiah has not entered into a set-apart place made by hands, figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of Elohim on our behalf, like Acharei did with the people. Not that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters into the set-apart place year by year with blood not his own, for if so, he would have had to suffer often, since the foundation of the world, but now he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the offering of himself. So at the end of the ages, we're going to have Yom Kippur fulfilled. Yeshua is going to appear with his own blood to make atonement for the sins and the uncleannesses of the people in the world. And remember, he's doing this in heaven. And you think, well, heaven's just this, surely this amazingly clean place. Well, what does he do with heaven? Once more, I shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. Okay, heaven isn't this place where the uncleanness of creation hasn't touched it. Atonement needs to be made for there as well, and this is what he'll do. And as it awaits men to die once, and after this the judgment, so also the Messiah, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, shall appear a second time, apart from sin, to those waiting for him unto deliverance or unto salvation. And this is that future salvation which we look for, that if we make atonement for ourselves and we serve as priests in the temple individually and corporately, then we will be found spotless, blameless before him unto that salvation. Verse 17 says, and no man should be in the tent of meeting when he goes in to make atonement to kafar in the set apart place until he comes out. And he shall kafar for himself and for his household and all the assembly of Israel. Okay, so no one can actually be in there. Only him, once he's made atonement with this particular blood, he's got to enter into the temple on his own if he wants to go into the Holy of Holies, this is like the most ridiculous thing that's ever happened. I can't even imagine what it would have been like to be the high priest on that day, being like, I'm going to go and do that thing again. I'm going to go and enter into the tent and nobody can even be in there, and I've got to go in with this blood, and I've got to be really specific about what I do and enter in before the actual presence of Yehovah. It must have been phenomenal. He shall go out to the altar that is in the presence of Yehovah, and he makes atonement for it. And he shall take some of the blood of the bull and some of the blood of the goat and put it on the horns of the altar all around. This is what we read about before when it says that he had to do this once a year to the golden altar. This is talking about the golden altar. And he shall sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times and cleanse it, set it apart from the uncleanness of the children of Israel. So again, now we understand these things. But this making atonement for the altar on Yom Kippur is not just something that we see given to us in the instructions. Obviously, we know in the feast days we see these things play out over and over and over again. Isaiah 61, 1-2 says, the Spirit of Yehovah is upon me because he's anointed me. He's sent me to preach glad tidings to the poor, to heal the broken in heart, to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to declare the acceptable year of Yehovah. And that's all what happened on the Day of Atonement when the ram's horn was blown and all of the captives would be set free and all of the rest of it. The latter half of this talks about what happens on Yom Kippur in the future. The day of recompense. Okay, this is often translated the day of vengeance, and that would be a very good translation. To comfort all that mourn, that there should be given to them that mourn in Sion glory instead of ashes, the oil of joy to the mourners, the garment of glory for the spirit of heaviness, and they shall be called generations of righteousness, the planting of Yehovah for glory. So this is a future promise that we have to look forward to on this day of recompense or this day of vengeance. Psalm 79, 9-10 says, help us, O Elohim, of our deliverance, for the sake of the glory of your name, and deliver us and cover over our sins for your name's sake. And that's not kafar. Why should the Gentiles say, where is their Elohim? Let the vengeance, related to the word that we saw before, of the outpoured blood of your servants be known among the Gentiles before our eyes. Cover over our sins. Let the vengeance, what vengeance? The vengeance for the outpoured blood of your servants be known among the Gentiles. Revelation 6, 9-10, and when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar in the heavenly tabernacle, the souls of those having been slain for the word of Elohim and for the witness which they held. Okay, so we've now got another altar, the one in heaven. And what we would expect to see is atonement being made for that on the Day of Atonement in the same way. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Master, set apart and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? On the day of vengeance, when you take vengeance for the outpoured blood of your servants, avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth. And there was given to each one a white robe, and they were told that they should rest a little while longer until both their fellow servants and their brothers who would be killed as they were was completed. Okay, so we've got a problem presented to us in Revelation 6. How long is it going to be until you avenge our blood? Revelation 16, 4-7, we get the answer. And the 3rd angel poured out his bowl on the rivers and fountains of water, and they became blood. If you watch Torah portion in more, you skip through to the part in that about Yom Kippur. Actually, it's in the bit about trumpets. I cover the bowls being poured out on Yom Kippur in response to the trumpet judgments. I heard the angel of the water saying, you are righteous, O Yehovah, the one who is and who was and who shall be, because you have judged these, because they've shed the blood of set apart ones and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink, for they deserve it. And I heard another out of the altar. Okay, if you read in Revelation, you've heard about them calling out of the altar already. I heard another out of the altar saying, yes, Yehovah El Shaddai, true and righteous are your judgments. How long is it going to be until you judge these people? We get the answer here, for the blood of the set apart ones. In Genesis 9 verse 5 it says, but only your blood for your souls I require from the hand of every beast, I require it from the hand of man, from the hand of every man's brother, I require the soul of a man. And we'll see when we get into Leviticus 17 how the blood and the soul work together. We'll look at things like blood transfusions and things like that. Okay, well, from the hand of every man's brother, I require the soul of man. What is he actually requiring? He's requiring the blood of man. Why? Because it atones. Do not profane the land where you are, for blood profanes the land, and the land is not atoned for the blood. It's not kafared for the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it. So if atonement is going to be made for the altar, it's got to be by the hands of those who shed it. Leviticus 17:11, and we'll look at all of Leviticus 17. It says, "For the soul of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement to kafar for your souls under the altar. For it is the blood that kafars for the soul." So what we should expect to see is blood, which is exactly what we do see. Deuteronomy 32 verse 43, again it says, "O nations, acclaim his people, for he avenges," same word, "the blood of his servant, returns vengeance to his adversaries, and shall kafar his land," his people, shall atone for his land, his people, on the day of vengeance, which is Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. When you understand the terms that are being used, you can see. When he is finished kafaring for the set-apart place, and the tent of meeting and the altar, he shall draw near with the live goat. Then Aharon shall lay both his hands on the head of the live goat, and shall confess over it all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all their transgressions and all their sins, and shall put them on the head of the goat, and shall send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a fit man. And we've looked before at how this is a picture of Hasatan. Okay? What it says is that all of their transgressions are going to be put on the head of Hasatan. Well, in Revelation it says the great dragon was thrown out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who leads all the world astray. So I want you to take hold of these phrases that are used. Great dragon, serpent of old, devil and Satan, leads all the world astray. Okay, so sin is ascribed to Hasatan. Not that it's his fault solely, but that he bears some responsibility for leading people astray. In Genesis 3:13-17 it says, "And Yehovah Elohim said to the woman, 'What is this you have done?' And the woman said, 'The serpent deceived me, and I ate.' 'Why have you done this? Why have you sinned?' 'The serpent led me astray.' Elohim said to the serpent, 'Because you've done this, you're cursed.'" Okay? Serpent takes his blame. "Put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall crush your head, and you shall crush his akav," or akev rather, from which we get Yaakov, okay, which he does indeed crush or bruise. "To the woman he said, I greatly increase your sorrow and your conception." So serpent, bad. Okay, sin has been ascribed to you. You've led them astray. Woman, bad. You did the sin, having been tempted. Man, bad. You listen to the voice of the woman. So the blame is apportioned to the right place, but some of it is put on the head of Hasatan. "When he's finished kafaring for the set-apart place and the tent of meeting, the altar, he shall draw near with the live goat. Aharon shall lay both his hands on the head of the live goat, confess over it all the iniquities of the children of Israel, all their transgressions and all their sins, put them on the head of the goat, and then it's sent away into the wilderness by the hand of a fit man." And indeed the word does put the sin on the head of the goat. Send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a fit man. And we've seen before how this happens. The goat bears on itself all the avon, all the consequence of the iniquity or the iniquities, to a land cut off, and shall send the goat away into the wilderness. Remember, the goat for Azazel was the goat for separation. Okay? This word, a land cut off, means a separation or a separate place. Okay, and it's from Gazar, and Gazar means to be cut off, separated or excluded, from where you get it's a separation or a separate place. So the goat for separation that the sins of the children of Israel are put on is then sent off into a place of separation. So an angel coming down from heaven having the key to the pit of the deep and a great chain in his hand. Okay, so this is a separate place. He sees the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan. Okay, you recognize what's being used there. The dragon, serpent of old, devil and Satan, who led all the world astray. The sins of the people being put on Hasatan. Exactly the same phrase is used, which is interesting. He threw him into the pit of the deep and shut him up and set a seal on him so that he should lead the nations no more astray. Exactly the same wording that is used here. So he throws him into the pit of the deep, shuts him up into the place of separation. A fit man, somebody deserving to do it, the angel from heaven. And Aharon shall come into the tent of meeting. He will take off the linen garments which he put on when he went into the Kodesh place, and shall leave them there. And he shall bathe his body in water in the set apart place, and shall put on his garments. He puts on the high priestly garments. And shall come out and prepare his olah, and the olah of the people, and kafar for himself and for the people. Okay, so once Yeshua has made atonement in heaven, once Hasatan has been sent into a separate place, we should expect to see Yeshua coming out, preparing a burnt offering and making atonement. Burn the fat of the sin offering, the chata'at, on the altar. And we do see something remarkably similar to this. I can't tell you it's a precise fulfillment of it, but it's very similar. Revelation 19:11-15 says, and I saw heaven opened, and there was a white horse. He who sat on him was called trustworthy and true, and in righteousness he judges and fights. Okay, so heaven is open. This is after he's made atonement in the heavens. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, having a name that had been written, which no one had perceived except himself. And he was arrayed in a robe covered in blood, and his name is called the Word of Yehovah. So why is his robe covered in blood? You could kind of understand it if he'd been in heaven offering blood in the set apart place. You'd maybe say, well, his robe's covered in blood because he was just offering loads of blood. But we're actually told why his robe's covered in blood when Shiloh comes, when Messiah comes. Yehudah is a lion's cub. From the prey you have gone up, my son. He bowed, he crouched down like a lion, and like a lion who does rouse him. The scepter shall not turn aside from Yehudah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him is the obedience of peoples. Binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. Okay, robes dipped in blood. And this is precisely what we see now in Revelation 19 as a description of what's happening. The armies in heaven, dressed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. But out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, and with it he should smite the nations, and he shall shepherd them with a rod of iron, and he treads the winepress and fierceness and wrath of El Shaddai. Okay, to him is the obedience of the peoples. And on his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I saw one angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in mid-heaven. Got a pretty loud voice, hasn't he? Standing in the sun. And he's saying this to the birds that are in the heavens. It's pretty impressive. Come and gather together for the supper of the great Elohim, to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of commanders, the flesh of strong ones, the flesh of horses, and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all the people, free and slave, both small and great. And if you read Ezekiel 39 or you read Zephaniah 1, this is described as a sacrifice that is offered at this point. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to fight him who sat on the horse and his army. And the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he led astray those receiving the mark of the beast and those who worshipped the image. And the two were thrown alive into the lake of fire burning with sulfur. So there's some people burning. There's a burnt offering for atonement to be made. What else did we see happen when Yeshua came? Okay, he divides the nations, the sheep from the goats. And what happens to the goats? He casts them into the lake of fire. There is a burnt offering for atonement. We see Yehovah when he plagues the people who were around the place where he was dwelling. Okay, it says that he made atonement through it. The rest were killed with the sword which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. Verse 26 says, and he who sent away the goat to Azazel washes his garments and shall bathe his body in water, and afterward he comes into the camp. And we don't have written anywhere in Scripture that this happens. And all that stuff in Revelation 19, maybe it's not a burnt offering. Okay, but it doesn't actually matter. What we know is that the Torah is true all the way through. And if the Torah requires it to be done, it will be fulfilled in some way. What we do see in Revelation 20 verse 19, it says afterwards he'll come into the camp. What we do see is they came up over the breadth of the earth and they surrounded the camp. Very specific term to be used here. The camp of the set apart ones and the beloved city. This is after Hasatan is released. This is millennial kingdom stuff. Okay, so this is where the set apart ones are dwelling. Just like Israel dwelled in the camp in the wilderness, which is what it's referring to. So if the one who threw Hasatan into the pit was an angel, what you would expect that we should be able to see from Scripture is that there are angels in the camp. Revelation 21, 9-12 says, and one of the 7 angels who held the 7 bowls filled with the 7 last plagues came to me, spoke with me, saying, come, I shall show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the spirit to the great and high mountain, showed me the great city, the set apart Jerusalem, descending out of the heaven from Elohim, having the esteem of Elohim, and her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Having a great wall, having 12 gates. And at the 12 gates, there were 12 angels. So do we have angels in the camp? We do. So it is at least feasible scripturally. And as I say, if the Torah prescribes it, then that is what we will see being done. Verse 27 says, and the bull for the chata'at, and the goat for the chata'at, whose blood was brought in to kafar in the set apart place, is brought outside the camp. And they shall burn their skins and their flesh and their dung with fire. And he who burns them washes his garments and shall bathe his body in water. And afterward he comes into the camp. It doesn't actually tell us here who will burn them. And this shall be for you a law forever. In the 7th Chodesh, on the 10th day of the Chodesh, you afflict your soul. Do no work, the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. For on that day he kafars for you, to cleanse you, so that you're clean from all your sins in the presence of Yehovah. Exactly what we see Yeshua doing when he fulfills Yom Kippur at the end of time. It is a Sabbath of rest for you, and you shall afflict your souls a law forever. The priest who is anointed and ordained to serve as priest in his father's place shall kafar and put on the linen garments, the set apart garments. He shall kafar for the mikdash kodesh, and he will kafar for the tent of meeting and for the altar, and kafar for the priests and for all the people of the assembly, so that we can go on another cycle, another year as Yehovah's people, with him dwelling in the midst. And there shall be for you a law forever to kafar for the children of Israel for all their sins once a year. And he did as Yehovah commanded Moshe. And as I say, that's what the Torah says. That's what we'll see in the end happening with Yeshua. The third part will look at the idea of the blood being for the soul. Its soul is in its blood, and all of the connotations and implications of that. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go through Leviticus 17 and 18 in this part. They're dead short chapters, but they've got some really, really interesting stuff in. Okay, so Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to Aaron and to his sons and to all the children of Israel, and say to them, this is the word which Yehovah has commanded, saying, any man from the house of Israel who slaughters a bull or a lamb or a goat in the camp, or who slaughters it outside the camp, and does not bring it to the door of the tent of meeting, to draw near with a means of drawing near to Yehovah, to use it basically as a means of drawing near to Yehovah, before the tent of meeting, or the dwelling place, the Mishkan, before where he's dwelling of Yehovah, blood guilt is reckoned to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. Okay, so even this is just the blood of animals that has been shed on the land. But this man is guilty of the blood of that animal because he didn't bring it as an offering to Yehovah. And you could ask, well, what about us now? Because we eat meat. Okay, if we were killing the meat, I would say, let's pour the blood out on the ground and cover it with dust and deal with it appropriately. But since we're just getting the meat to eat afterwards, we're not actually sinning. We're not transgressing against anything. In order that the children of Israel bring their sacrifices, which they sacrifice in the open field, and they shall bring them to Yehovah at the door of the tent of meeting, to the priest, and sacrifice them as zivchei shlamim to Yehovah. So they've got to, in the way that the peace offering was slaughtered and offered to Yehovah, that's how they've got to offer any animal that they kill in the camp or outside the camp. And the priest shall sprinkle the blood on the altar of Yehovah, the door of the tent of meeting, and shall burn the fat for a sweet fragrance to Yehovah. And let them no longer sacrifice their sacrifices to demons after whom they whored. This is a law forever for them throughout their generation. So obviously this is what they were doing. When they were killing animals, they'd be like, oh, let's offer it to this god or to that god. No, they've got to be brought, and they are peace offerings to Yehovah. They're ways that you atone through the peace offering. And say to them, any man of the house of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn among you, who offers an olah or sacrifice and does not bring it to the door of the tent of meeting to do it to Yehovah, that man shall be cut off from among his people. And any man of the house of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn among you, who eats any blood, I shall set my face or my presence against that soul who eats blood, and shall cut him off from among his people. For the soul of the flesh is in the blood, and I've given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. It is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. So the soul is in the blood, and we're going to see more verses as we go through that specifically say the blood is for the soul. It's for the soul. Soul of the flesh is in the blood. So to make atonement for blood that's been shed, you require blood, which is also for a soul. And this brings us to the question of blood transfusions. Are blood transfusions acceptable? The people will say, on one side of the argument, they'll say, well, you're not to consume blood. So to have it as a blood transfusion, that's surely wrong. Because of the law, you shall not consume blood. And other people will say, well, you're not consuming the blood, you're not eating the blood, you're saving a life, and saving a life is this amazing thing. So we need to look to the Torah to see what it actually says about the blood, to see how we should be treating it. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, no soul among you eats blood, nor does any stranger who sojourns among you eat blood. Again, Genesis 9:5, only blood for your souls I require. From the hand of every beast I require it. From the hand of man, from the hand of every man's brother, I require the soul of man. And it's soul, it's not life. Like in the Greek when Peter was talking before, it's the sucha, but it's not the life, it's the soul. You've cleansed your souls, not cleansed your lives. 17:13 says, and any man from the children of Israel or from the strangers who sojourn among you who hunts. Okay, so for anybody, perhaps those online, who hunts, we've got a Torah commandment here. Who hunts and catches any beast or bird which is eaten shall pour out its blood and cover it with dust. So if we ever go hunting, I don't know if you've ever been hunting, Jeff, this is what we're to do. Pour out the blood and cover it with dust. For it is the soul of all flesh. Its blood is for its soul. Okay? And I said to the children of Israel, do not eat the blood of any flesh, for the soul of all flesh is its blood. Okay? Anyone eating it is cut off. So when we come to the question of a blood transfusion, should we be saving a life by injecting the soul of another person into us? The soul, its blood is for its soul. Its soul is its blood. Should we be injecting that into ourselves? Well, I would say it's an incredibly sacred thing. It's given to us to make atonement. If we're not to eat it and physically consume it, then the idea of drawing it up into a needle and squirting it into somebody else is probably not a good idea. Any soul who eats a carcass or what is torn by a beast, be he a native or a stranger, he shall wash his garments and bathe in water and shall be unclean until evening. Then he shall be clean. So this word, carcass, is an interesting word. Okay, if carcass meant, we were talking about this the other week, if carcass meant literally just a thing that was alive and is now dead, it's a dead body, then that would mean any time you ate any meat that was clean meat, then you would be unclean because you'd eaten the meat. Carcass, what it actually means is something that's died of itself, basically. Something that you find and it's dead. It's its carcass. We've got an English word that we've plugged in there to the Hebrew, which is not representative of what it is. Some translations actually say that anything that's died of itself, or what was torn by a beast. So something that's been killed by something else, or something that has died. Okay, it's close to the realm of life and death. It's died for some reason. It's been killed by a predatory animal for some reason. Okay, in that case, if you eat that, then you'll be unclean. Wash yourself and your garments, and you'll be unclean till evening, and then you'll be clean. If he does not wash or bathe his body, then he shall bear his iniquity. And we saw that in the law of sins committed by mistake. If you didn't know that this had happened and you become unclean, then you would still bear your avon, your iniquity. And Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am Yehovah your Elohim. Do not do as they do in the land of Mitzrayim, where you dwelt, and do not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you, and do not walk in the chukah. Okay, and there's a rabbinical teaching, I believe, for ages that a chukah was like this special sort of law, and it meant this thing, and it's got all this special significance. It doesn't mean that. It's just a statute. It's just a law. Okay, do not walk in their chukah. Whose? Okay, those of the land of Mitzrayim or the land of Canaan. They might have been following the code of Hammurabi or whatever. Don't follow after that garbage. Do my justices, and justice is probably what I'm going to go with moving on. I've struggled with what to translate mishpat as. Judgments, right rulings. Really it's justices, because when you look at those laws, they tell you what is the just thing to do in that situation. So I'm going to go with justices, and there's my reasoning. Do my justices and cherish my chukah to walk in them. I am Yehovah your Elohim. And you shall cherish my chukah and my justices, which a man does and lives by them. I am Yehovah. No one is to approach, and the word there is the same one, karav. Okay, when we are drawing near to Elohim, we are drawing near to the tent of meeting, his dwelling place, physically. Okay, when it comes to the spiritual sacrifices, we're drawing near to him figuratively. But this is a literal way that this word is used as well. No one shall karav, draw near to anyone of his own flesh to uncover his nakedness. I am Yehovah. The nakedness of your father or the nakedness of your mother you do not uncover. She is your mother, you do not uncover her nakedness. The nakedness of your father's wife you do not uncover, because it's your father's nakedness. And that'll be relevant in a minute. The nakedness of your sister, the daughter of your wife, the daughter of your mother, whether born at home or elsewhere, their nakedness you do not uncover. So there's a lot about nakedness in this passage. And when I see a word that I think, what is the actual concept there? Because we've put nakedness in there. What's the actual concept? First place that I'll go to will be the Septuagint. And I'll say, well, how did the translators of the Septuagint understand that, to put it into Greek? And the word that they use is mosune, unseemliness, an unseemly deed of a woman's genitals, of one's nakedness or shame. And we talk about our shame, don't we? Cover up your shame. Don't cover your shame. Leviticus 18 verse 6 in the Septuagint, to any family member of his flesh shall not draw near to uncover the aschemosune. I am Yehovah, their indecency. And this concept, this makes sense, doesn't it? This is what we kind of understand by don't uncover their nakedness. You read that passage and you think, well, yeah, okay, that's what it means. In the narrative about Noah, we see a different word. It says, and began Noah the man to be a farmer of the land, and he planted the vineyard, and he drank from the wine and became intoxicated and became naked in his house. And he looked at Ham, the father of Canaan, the gumnosin of his father. So what was the problem that is detailed here was that he looked at his nakedness, but we're going to see something more as we go on. He looked at the nakedness of his father, and going forth from his tent, he announced 2 brothers to his outside. And taking Shem and Japheth, the cloak, laced it upon 2 backs theirs, and went backwards and covered up the gumnosin of their father. And their face was backwards, and the gumnosin of their father they looked not at. It doesn't say they didn't uncover it. It says that they didn't look at it. And the problem of what Ham did was that he looked at the nakedness of their father. But then, just as in the Hebrew, it says, just throws up this really puzzling thing. Sobered up in Noah from the wine, and knew as much, did to him son his younger. He knew what his younger son had done to him. To look at his nakedness is not something that is done to Noah. Okay, you couldn't say that. What they were concerned with was looking at his nakedness. We saw before, you shall not uncover your mother's nakedness, because it is your father's nakedness. Okay, so what did his son do to him? Okay, and we've looked at this before, but even the Greek, through using these different words, points us in that direction of Ham probably slept with his mother. Genesis 3, 6-7. Okay, we've got the idea of what it is to uncover someone's nakedness. Okay, to look at somebody's nakedness or whatever. There's also a spiritual application of this, to uncover your nakedness. Okay, what is your nakedness? The woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise. She took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. And the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made loin coverings for themselves. So they knew that they were naked. How did they know that they were naked? They sinned. And after they sinned, they knew that they were naked. Does sin confer upon you some kind of knowledge of whether or not you're wearing clothes? It doesn't. But if you sin, you may become aware of spiritual nakedness. Genesis 3, 10-11 says, and he said, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself. Adam was afraid because he was naked. Oh wait, there, he's just made loin coverings for himself. So he wasn't naked wearing no clothes, but he was naked in a different way. He said, who made you know that you were naked? Somebody has made you to know that you were naked. Have you eaten of the tree? So Yehovah says to Adam, how is it that you know that you're naked? Did you do the thing that I told you not to do? Became aware of your nakedness, because what are we told? Hebrews 4 verse 13, there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all are naked and laid bare before the eyes of him with whom is our account. Okay, so we all have a spiritual nakedness before Elohim. Revelation 3:18, I advise you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, so that you become rich, and white garments so that you become dressed, so that the shame of your nakedness might not be shown. Okay? What did they say when they were naked? What does the scripture say about their nakedness? It says that they were ashamed. I don't think that they were prudish, that they suddenly went, ooh, you can see my willy. I think that the shame of their nakedness was an actual shame, a moral shame, the shame of their nakedness. It's exactly the same phrase that we read of here. Okay, so whether or not there was a spiritual nakedness, that's unimportant. The point is that there is a spiritual nakedness that we have before the Father, that you can apply these Torah commandments to, about exposing someone else's nakedness. Verse 10 says, the nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, their nakedness you do not uncover, for theirs is your own nakedness. The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, brought forth by your father, she is your sister, you do not uncover her nakedness. And the reasons that it starts giving for why you don't uncover someone else's nakedness are all quite weird. The nakedness of your father's sister you do not uncover, she's your father's flesh. So she's your father's flesh, don't uncover her nakedness. The nakedness of your mother's sister you do not uncover, for she's your mother's flesh. The nakedness of your father's brother you do not uncover. You do not draw near to his wife, she's your aunt. The nakedness of your daughter-in-law you do not uncover. She is your son's wife, you do not uncover her nakedness. The nakedness of your brother's wife you do not uncover. It is your brother's nakedness. The nakedness of a woman and her daughter you do not uncover, nor do you take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They're her relatives, it is wickedness. Okay. Just a statement that's thrown out there. They're related, it's wickedness. They're their flesh, it's wickedness. I would suggest that it's something to do with the becoming one flesh thing, although I couldn't prove it to you. And do not take a woman as a rival to her sister to uncover her nakedness while the other is alive. And when I saw this verse, I was like, this is amazing. I've been looking for this verse for ages and ages and ages and ages. It's always been on my mind. In Romans 7, when Paul says, I speak to those of you who know the law, that the law has dominion over somebody basically while they're alive. After they're dead, it doesn't have dominion over them anymore. I thought, where in the Torah is he getting this from? Has he just made up this rule? Well, it's this, isn't it? He's talking about taking someone as a wife, and that you can't take another wife until they're dead. Do not take a woman as a rival to her sister while the other is alive. So when they are dead, this Torah has no more dominion over them, and you can remarry. So this is where Paul gets it from in Romans 7. Verse 19 says, and do not draw near to a woman to uncover her nakedness in her monthly separation of Tumah. Okay, it's got nothing to do with the Chodesh. Monthly separation is Hebrew. In Hebrew is Nidah. It's just her period, basically. Do not have intercourse with the wife of your neighbor to defile yourself with her. And we see these terms being introduced back in here, the uncleanness. Okay, that's why Yehovah wants atonement, because he's surrounded by all of this garbage that's going on. Don't make it any worse. Don't make yourself tamai. Do not give any of your offspring to pass through to Moloch, and do not profane the name of your Elohim. I am Yehovah. Do not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. Do not have intercourse with any beast to make yourself tamei with it. Unclean, and a woman does not stand in the presence of a beast to mate with it. It is a perversion. Okay, all these things, all the creation was in a certain way, wasn't it? Okay, Adam and Eve sinned, and then death enters into creation. And then you've got all these uncleannesses created, which again is all linked to atonement. Do not make yourselves tamai with all these, for by these all the nations are tamai, which I'm driving out before you. So all of the nations have made themselves tamai, and we've looked before at the idea of what makes us holy, what makes us set apart from the nations. Things like the Sabbath are not necessarily sin to them, but they do have a problem that they have made themselves unclean before Yehovah. Thus the land became tamei, became unclean. Therefore I punished it for its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall guard my chukah and my mishpat, and you do not do any of these abominations, the native nor stranger who sojourns among you. Because the men of the land who were before you have done all these abominations, and thus the land became tamei. Okay, so we've started off with atonement. You've got to atone it because of all the uncleannesses of the land. And then as we've progressed through this, it starts to tell us a bit more about what makes us defiled, what makes us tamei, why he can't dwell there. And the children of Israel who've returned from the Gentiles, the exile, ate together with all those who had separated themselves from the tumah of the Gentiles. Okay, it's this separation, again, which we need to do. That's what being holy is. It's separating ourselves from these things. So let not the land vomit you out for making it tamei, as it vomited out those nations who were before you. Whoever does any of these abominations, those souls who do them shall be cut off from among their people. And you shall guard my charge so as not to do any of these abominable practices. And again, to guard his charge isn't to physically guard it. It's to make sure that you do what he's told you to do, just as the Levites, which were before you, so as to not make yourself unclean by them. I am Yehovah your Elohim. So you do these laws to stop yourself becoming tamei. However, no matter how many of the laws you do, because you're still in a fallen creation that death has entered into, you're still going to need to make atonement. And I really don't think that the children of Israel were all that holy before him in the first place, all that clean before him. And this brings us on to being clean to where Charlie's going to go next week, which is this. I am Yehovah, who is bringing you up out of the land of Mitzrayim to be your Elohim, and you shall be kadosh, for I am kadosh. You shall be the name holy. I will make your name holy. Okay, you clean. You've got the unclean. Next to that, you make yourself clean. But then having made atonement for yourself, you go the next step and you make yourself holy. And that's what Charlie will be looking at. Should we pray? Father, we want to be pleasing in your sight. Thank you for the atonement that you've made for us, and thank you that you've given us all that we need for life and reverence, and that we can just trust your word and do it, and we'll find ourselves atoned for and spotless and blameless before you at your coming. Pray, Father, that you help us to see who you are, and you help us to see your holiness, and to set us apart, to make us kadosh in your sight. We want to be pleasing before you when you look down from heaven. Thank you for everything that you've done, everything that you've put in place to allow us to be made clean when we've made ourselves filthy before you and defiled ourselves. Thank you that you knew all these things from the beginning, and everything was just there set in place to play out, to bring us to you. And thank you that you've put in our hearts a desire to walk in your ways, to be clean and to be kadosh before you. Pray, Father, that you help us in this. Don't let us stray from your paths. Let us be the remnant, the ones who are walking on the narrow path. Thank you for all that you've showed us. Pray that we're worthy of it, Father. Thank you. Amen.